right. I think we're just gonna go ahead and get started. Just 2 minutes past the hour here, and sort of people start trickling in throughout, and that's okay. Welcome everyone to our Alteryx Predictive Palette with Python. Some of you might have been with Newcom for a while and seen us do similar things in the past, and we kind of thought, oh, now's a sort of a good time to start talking about this kind of stuff again, as we're hearing from our community and from people out in the analytics space throughout Canada. Things are gearing back up towards more of that data science and sort of running experiments with machine learning and like, okay, how do we start optimizing things? And we thought, now's a good time to sort of showcase where Alteryx fits within that sort of pipeline of data science, machine learning, advanced analytics space. So we'll quickly do some introductions of myself and Jason. So my name is Steve Venko. I'm a technical account manager here with Newcomp. I've been with Newcomp for about 3 years at this point. Some of you might have seen me before, maybe know who I am, but been working with Alteryx for basically that entire time. And I came into the space very, very green to analytics. I graduated from business school and kind of dove into the analytics world, and Alteryx was my first real taste of self-serve analytics and advanced analytics, and that's sort of why I've stuck with it for the last 3 years of my career as my sort of primary go-to for almost anything, is because I find it's been able to grow with what I need to do with it, from doing joins and unions to filtering and doing more complicated formulas and regex, to now I deal a lot with data science, machine learning, and AI, and using Python for these kinds of things. And I still find it very, very useful for those applications and being able to rapidly prototype a lot of these things. I've also asked Jason Beckham to join me. He's one of our data science consultants, all very, very experienced with Alteryx and Python and a lot of the use cases surrounding machine learning and all those pieces. So he's going to be walking us through a little bit of a demo of how we can best leverage Alteryx's Python tool to sort of get the most out of our investments in our tool on that end. For those of you that are kind of brand new to the Newcomp community, I just wanted to give you a quick overview of who we are. Newcomp Analytics has been a leading analytics firm in practice for 27 years more so. I know it says 1997 is sort of when we really went both feet into it, but it's been part of our DNA for a very long time. It's definitely been part of the company's DNA for longer than I've even been alive. So that's partly why I love working at Newcomp and being able to do these kinds of events and showcase our best partnerships like Alteryx. A lot of people might also know us from our other partnerships, with IBM, Microsoft, Tableau, Snowflake, Data Robot on that AI piece there, and then some of the other ones that we work with, Adaptive, Vena, ThoughtSpot. That's just sort of a quick overview of, about Newcomp. I myself am based in Calgary, Alberta, and then Jason's out in Toronto, so we kind of span Canada from coast to coast in that sense. And without really further ado, I'm probably going to pass it over to Jason to sort of start taking us through that sort of journey of getting to use Python with Alteryx and sort of showcasing what we can accomplish within there. Jason, I'll let you take over the screen share now.
Perfect. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay, can you see Alteryx?
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining first of all. And what I want to do is first give you guys an introduction to Alteryx. So if you haven't seen Alteryx before, it's really an end-to-end solution, like Steve said. It's going to enable anyone from a data analyst to a data scientist, even a data engineer, to drag and drop tools into a really auditable workflow. So for instance, let's just dive into a workflow and see how it goes. So for instance, sorry, got my notifications. I can't block them for some reason, but for instance, let's say you want to bring in some Excel data into Tableau. Well, I'm going to go up to my first palette, so in and out at the top left of Alteryx, and I'm going to choose my input data tool to actually bring data in. From here, I can choose what kind of file I want to bring in. For instance, let's do an Excel file. Here we are, Microsoft Excel. I can browse to a folder onto my computer. I just have a generic Superstore data set here that I've brought into Alteryx. Okay, awesome. So we have our data inside of Alteryx. And I don't know about you guys, but a lot of the time when I have a data set, I don't know how good the quality of it is. I want to be able to make changes to it very quickly, but sometimes it just sometimes that process can actually be most of your workflow anyway. So I'm going to show you a few tips on what I would do in Alteryx to make sure this data set is good and how to sort of transform it a little bit for your analysis. So first of all, there's a great tool called Browse. So I'm going to bring my Browse tool. I'm going to connect it to my Superstore data set, and then I'm going to hit Run at the top right of my screen to effectively run through my workflow and activate my tools. By running this and having a Browse tool on the left-hand side of my screen, I can actually get a lot of information about each one of my fields. So for instance, I have this category field that's coming in as a text data type, and this category has 3 different labels. It's mostly office supplies, so we have 31,000 office supplies, 10,000 technology, and 9,000 furniture. That's awesome. This bar also will tell you about your data health. So right now it says 100% okay. But if I had any nulls, if I had any trailing or leading white space, this is where Alteryx would really tell me. And let's say I did have to deal with those nulls. What I could do is use a data cleansing tool to quickly deal with that. So I could remove any null rows, any null columns, replace my nulls. I could remove any trailing or white space. So that's a really great tool if you kind of want to just do a very quick data prep and deal with your nulls. You can also use a tool that I use all the time called Select. With this Select tool, we have, first of all, the name of our field. We have the type of data that that field is coming in as. So if I did want to change this, I could change it right here from a string to a double, to a date time, to a spatial object if I wanted to. And then I also have rename. I also have the ability to rename my field. So maybe I don't want my category to be named category. Maybe I want it to be product category. Perfect. I've named it product category. I can run my workflow. And the thing that I like the most about Alteryx is the function of its anchors. So right now, if I click on this incoming anchor into my select tool, I can actually see my data as it's going into my select tool. So I can say, okay, this is my data before my tool. And if I now click on my outgoing anchor, which is this little triangle here, I can see how that tool affected my data. And we can see, look, product category at the bottom, so category has been renamed. This kind of functionality is really great at auditing your your workflow. If you have any issues, if you have any bugs, you can go through each one of your tools and see how that data is actually affecting, or how that tool is actually affecting your data downstream. And it's also going to be important when we start to use our Python tool, because essentially all a Python tool is another way to connect data that is in your workflow and then output it to another tool. Okay, so we're going to go through that in a second. I'm just going to show you one last tool in for this workflow. Let's say you want to group these product categories now. So I'm going to select group by product category, and let's just grab the sales for that product category. So we'll do a sum of sales. Perfect. Now we see down here, we have our 3 product categories and the total sales. Okay, awesome. So that concludes just a very quick intro to Alteryx. In case anyone hasn't seen it and they just saw the word Python, they're like, yes, Python, let's go. Let's now actually get into a Python workflow. So while Alteryx does have a whole bunch of pre-built predictive tools, so if I click up top here on this Predictive Palette, there's a bunch of predictive tools. You can even install more if you want to. There's also a machine learning palette that has a bunch of models you can use as well. So Alteryx has a bunch of stuff there. So you can 100% use these tools and use very minimal coding to still produce data science models. But maybe you already have your Python scripts ready to run your models, and you just want to integrate them in Tableau, or you want, or not Tableau, Alteryx, and with those scripts, you want to integrate them into Alteryx, and you want to be able to troubleshoot them in Alteryx, maybe run them on a schedule through your Alteryx server. Well, I'm going to show you how we can do that with a Python tool. So the Python tool is in the developer tab. It's right up here. I'm just going to drag it in for now. But with this Python tool, we have an input anchor and we actually have 5 output anchors. So first of all, we need to actually push some data into our Python tool. So let's see how we can do that. We are going to do. We're going to do a clustering example. So first, I'm going to bring in a CSV file. It has a bunch of data on some countries. So I'd say it's considered best practice to always attach a browse tool to your data set. This data set's a little smaller, but let's do it anyway. And let's take a look at our data set first before we start to code in Python. All right, so our data set consists of each row being a country. So for instance, we have France, and we have an index. So France has a liquor index of 2.5. They drink mostly wine, and we have also metrics for life expectancy as well as heart disease. Okay, so this is just a series of countries, and let's cluster this into, I don't know, 3 or 4 clusters using Python. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is make sure I have the proper data types. So you could do this in Python, right? But I find it much easier to do in Alteryx because it's just drag and drop. So let's do select, and let's just change all of our, most of our fields to be doubles if they are meant to be numeric types, and it's going to be important that they're doubles if we are to actually cluster them. Perfect. So now that everything's a double, I can now pass this into my Python tool. And let's take a look at what the configuration looks like for our Python tool. All right, so with Python and Alteryx, it's actually just an embedded Jupyter notebook that runs on Miniconda. And we're going to see two cells that are always pretty standard. So the first one is we're going to import package as well as import Alteryx. So that's going to be very standard. And then if you do need to install any packages, so you get an error that says missing module, you can also uncomment this and just replace that module that you would like to actually install there as well. Okay, so not too hard. This comes pre-built with Alteryx, so you will have these two cells every time. Okay, so let's take a look at how we can actually read data into Alteryx. So I'm going to say data is equal to Alteryx dot read #1. So that's a hashtag 1. And then I'm just going to print out my data. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So with Alteryx, I could run my workflow, but I actually have an instance of Jupyter Notebook happening within this Python tool. So I can actually just troubleshoot this like I would any other Jupyter Notebook by hitting this run button. Oh, I actually do have to run it once just to feed the data in, and then we can run it in Jupyter Notebook. Okay, beautiful. So this has run already, but we could do it in Jupyter Notebook as well once we've run it once. But what we're doing essentially is we've read 1. So that's the anchor that's coming in. You can actually bring as many data sets as you want into this tool as well. But we're just reading in #1 here, which corresponds to this select tool. And we see we have a preview of our data. So our data looks very similar to just that tabular format that we've been working with in Alteryx. All right, so let's import sklearn. So say from sklearn.cluster, I'm going to import my k-means. All right, that's great. And then I'm going to say my cluster data is just going to be a subset. So I'm just going to choose some columns here. Cluster data is equal to, we're just going to take all of our numeric columns. So liquor, wine, beer, life expectancy, as well as heart disease. Okay, perfect. And then let's fit our data into some k-mean clusters. So we'll say k-means is equal to k-means with n clusters. So let's do 4 clusters. We're going to say random state equals 0, and then we're going to fit our cluster data. Okay, so hopefully there's no typos and I can run this. Actually, let's just print. Let's print our labels as well. So I'll do print k-means dot label. If I run this, a bit of a typo here. So let me see what I got wrong. Equals 4, random state, fit. Not sure, but that's why we come pre-prepared with with our code. We're not just coding on the fly here. And I'm just going to restart my kernel here. Let's run this one more time. All right, so we actually, just doing that one line didn't work. Let's just run this one more time, get our labels going. I have a syntax error of some sort. Here we go. So we have our labels. So here we go. This is our labels that are going to correspond to the cluster for each one of the countries in our data set. So with that, now that we have that cluster, we're able to actually write this back to Alteryx um, and join it to our other data set. But before we do that, let's just take matplotlib for 1 second. Let's take a look at how we can use matplotlib in Alteryx as well. So I'm going to import my matplotlib library as PLT, and then we can build a scatter plot with that, with our cluster data as well. So I think if I do PLT scatter, should be able to see it. Maybe not. Am I getting another error here? Wow, brutal. There we go. Guess I didn't run my labels. Here we go. We're running matplotlib as well. So you know, this is fine if you want to be able to preview, if you're used to using matplotlib to audit how your Jupyter notebook workflow is going. That's perfectly fine. You can take a look, and yeah, we can see we have our different clusters here, as well as the life expectancy versus heart disease. Okay, so now that we have our labels, we've seen how we can troubleshoot this with matplotlib. We can also now export it back to Alteryx. So to export anything from Alteryx, we're always going to have to use pandas. Well, for tabular data at least. So let's import pandas as PD. And then let's convert our labels to be a pandas data frame. So we'll say label df is equal to pd dot data frame. Data is equal to k-means dot labels. And then once we have that data frame, we can actually take a look at it very quickly. Let's run this. Again, I can't type today. There we go. We now have our pandas data frame in here as well. And this is perfect to be able to write back to Alteryx. So to write this to Alteryx, all we have to say is Alteryx dot write labels df, and then we'll say 1 labels df. Okay, so this is the part that actually, it took me the longest to actually figure out how can I write this back out to Alteryx, because this is the part that you don't usually do in Python. So it's basically one line. We're going to say Alteryx write. This is going to be the pandas data frame that you're going to want to export from your Python package. And then this one corresponds to the output anchor of Python. So it's going to come out right here. So let's run this workflow now. And by running my workflow, I'm going to import my data. I'm going to use my select tool. And then that Python script is also going to be activated. And we can see on our output anchor number 1, we have our clusters. Okay, so we've essentially brought it back to Alteryx, and we're able to manipulate it like we would any other data set into Alteryx. So pretty minimal configuration when you think about it. You just have to, there's just a different way of importing packages, and there's a different way of exporting your data. But of course, with Python, you're going to run into a whole bunch of different ways to export your data anyway. So not too much has changed there. But okay, what can we do with this data set? Well, these are the clusters that actually correspond now to our different countries. So let's join this onto our country data set using a join tool. I'm going to connect my output anchor 1 to my right join, and I'm going to join by record position. By doing this now, if I take a look at my data set, the result of my inner join, I can see that I now have my column here that is actually my clusters for each one of my countries. Okay, so pretty great. Let's just rename that cluster to be actually cluster instead of just 0. So I'll say cluster, and there we go. Let's run one last time, and we'll be happy with our output. Okay, perfect. There we go. We now have our clusters attached to our countries. Let's take a look really quickly at what countries are mostly together. So we have the Czech Republic that is by itself with 1, and also Russia that's also by itself with 2. So we'll have to take a look at some graphs to sort of see why that is happening. And then all the other countries are either in 3 or 0. So maybe I want to sort of determine why this is happening for my cluster. Maybe I want to build a series of scatter plots and compare my measures. So we can do this in Alteryx. While Alteryx isn't used very often for our clients in terms of reporting tools, it still does have a pretty good reporting tab. So under reporting, we can add something called an interactive chart. And I'm just going to configure this chart now by adding a layer. I'm going to call this first layer cluster. My X column will be, let's say, heart disease, and my Y column will be life expectancy. Okay, great. So we can see here we have our scatter plot with a negative correlation. I think that makes sense. The higher rates of heart disease that you have, the lower amount of life expectancy that you'll probably have, but it's actually not too bad. It's actually only like 68 versus like 80, so that's not too bad. So that's our clusters. We can add some. We can actually add the clusters here. So if I go to layer, and I'll say which one is it again? Sorry, I just got to bring this up on my screen. I can't even remember how to do this chart anymore. So under layer, I'm going to click variable to actually choose a column to be my layer. And I'll say the one I want to use now is cluster. By doing that, we now have our clusters color coded here. So we have our gray, we have orange, and we also have red. Let's maybe make these a little bigger. So let's make them bigger so we can see them. There we are. So You can do other things. You could add labels to this. You can make the legend more robust. You could do a whole lot of things. So that's great. And you can also export that chart to a Word document or a PDF if you'd like to as well. More commonly though, in Alteryx, what we're seeing is a lot of people are already using Tableau or Power BI within they already have like a ton of licenses for either one of those two visualization tools. And so they're asking us, well, how can we incorporate Tableau or Power BI with Alteryx? Can it even be done? Well, there is a connector for Tableau and Power BI, but when you think about it, Tableau can also just take in an Excel file as a data source, or it can take in a CSV as a data source. So as long as you're exporting your data out of your Alteryx workflow, let's say with an output data tool here, let's output this table to a CSV. As long as I'm outputting it to as a data type, or Microsoft Excel works too. As long as I export it as an Excel or as a CSV, let's do output clusters too. I can actually use this now in Tableau. So if I was to bring up Tableau, let's build that same chart in Tableau and kind of see how we can run this workflow and update Tableau at the same time. So by running my workflow in Alteryx, I'm going to get an output clusters Excel file that comes out of my workflow. So here we go, output clusters 2. I can just push this into Tableau. I can say in Tableau, I want to connect to the same table, and I'm going to set it to be a live data connection. So the implications of this are really great. You can essentially run your Alteryx workflow, and anytime that underlying table is going to change, you're going to be able to have that data be reflected in Tableau. For instance, okay, let's say you have an Alteryx server and you're running the workflow on a schedule. You could have 100% automated reports through Tableau or through Alteryx as well. So let's create that chart really quickly. And so we're going to do life expectancy on columns. Let's take heart disease on rows. And then we're going to take our cluster on color. Okay, so we have our 3 different, let's do average for each. We have our 4 different clusters. We can even now add our countries to our labels, and we can see, oh, which countries are actually together here. Oh, I'm actually just going to flip this. There we go. So on the left side, with the higher life expectancy and lower average heart disease, we have a cluster that has Japan, France, Italy, Switzerland, and Mexico. And then we have Austria, US, and UK that actually have quite a bit of heart disease. And then as the heart disease increases, we have the Czech Republic and Russia, who are slightly below our life expectancy line for most of our other countries, except for Mexico. Okay, so this Tableau workbook is great. We're incorporating it with our workflow by simply outputting our CSV data file. This data, so I did CSVs, but you could bring in data from servers. You could output to your Tableau server as well. Really, you could make it as institutional as you want and move large sums of data like this as well. Okay, perfect. And the last thing I love to show in Alteryx is their containers. So let's say we want to deal with our data preparation. And we say, oh, this section is my data preparation, and this section is my data science. This is my join, and then I also have my different outputs. Okay, awesome. So I have a series of containers. I can actually label them. So I'll label this one input and prep. We'll say this is clustering with Python. Joining data from CSV and Python. And then finally, we have our reporting and export. Right now, my workflow is pretty small, but when you start to have like 100 tools in the same workflow, it's really great to be able to minimize these containers and just open up a container where you want to maybe go in and modify it a little bit. It will help you be able to organize this much better. The alternative is to do all of this work in Python, which for the stuff, for like the select tools and the data preparation, you might write, the development time is going to be a lot longer because you don't have access to these drag and drop tools. You'll be more susceptible to user error. But by combining the boring data prep stuff with Alteryx, and then even the join stuff, maybe you want to join in another data set on there. Well, you no longer have to worry about joining a whole lot of data within Python and troubleshooting that each time. You can actually have a really great user-friendly interface where you're able to join that data. And then the last piece that I'm going to talk about before we hop to our next example is if you need to pass this on to a coworker. So we have a lot of clients that are into auditing. So with auditing, they'll set up this workflow using someone senior. They'll set it up, and then as the renews come in, it requires less expertise, so they'll pass it on to someone more junior. And with that junior person now, they're receiving this workflow that can be really well documented with containers and even annotations. So maybe with this select tool, I'm doing something fancy. I can actually say changing data to doubles. With this annotation now, you can actually say what's happening at each step. You no longer have to create a separate README file or comment every line of code in Python. Someone can easily see, oh, this is what my senior manager was trying to do with this workflow. I now no longer have to go to them every time that I have a question. I can just see step by step what is happening here. And then if they do need to actually change the Python code, which hopefully they won't, but let's say they do, they can actually troubleshoot it using Jupyter Notebook, which seems to be now the industry standard for just whipping up a quick script and seeing the output at each step. All right. So let's hop into another workflow. So this workflow is going to be smaller, but it's something that actually interests me a great deal, and it's something that I do on a personal project basis as well. But more on that later. So let's say you want to web scrape data in Python. If you've ever done that and you've used Beautiful Soup, for instance, as a package, you'll run into issues where data is not static on a web page. Data might be rendered conditionally based off of JavaScript, and with that, you have issues where you actually need to open up a version of Chrome to get access to that data first. So this workflow is really going to be how can we how can we open up Chrome using Alteryx that's integrated with Python? All right, so let's say I want to connect to a specific website. I'm just going to use Google right now. I'm going to bring in a text input tool where I can actually write that website in. For instance, just google.ca, and I'm going to name the field website. Yeah, just website. Perfect. So we're going to connect to google.ca, and we're going to actually open it up using Python here. So with google.ca, let's connect a Python tool. And let's import our packages to begin. So we're going to use Selenium. So I'm going to say from Selenium, import WebDriver. And I'm also going to import options from my WebDriver. Let's run this. And now that I've run this one time, I'm now able to start troubleshooting my Jupyter notebook as well. So I run this, we run this, see if we get any errors. Nope, no errors, we're good to go. Let's now bring in that data into that website that we want to scrape into our Python tools. So we'll say data1 is equal to, now this is a slightly different syntax than what I've shown before. We're going to say Alteryx read, Alteryx get incoming connections 0. Okay, so this is a way to actually reference the first line in our data here. So we're saying just 0. So we're going to get google.ca. I'll bring that up a little closer. And let's bring that up. Okay, Alteryx read, get incoming connection names. We're just going to say 0 to get Google. We can even print that. We'll see data is website google.ca. All right, perfect. And then let's get just the website name here by writing website is equal to data 1 website 0. And hopefully there's no typo here. Perfect. So we have google.ca. Now with google.ca, we can now feed it into Selenium. So Selenium is really great. It's basically, it's a package that was designed to be able to rapidly test websites. Let's say if you want to see if functionality was working properly, you could set up some scripts. I use it to populate JavaScript objects or JavaScript data from websites to do my web scraping. Basically, to do this, I need to have chromedriver.exe. So if you Google chromedriver.exe, you'll be able to download this, and you need to place this on your machine. Okay, I've placed this on my machine, and basically I'm saying to Python here is I want to set my driver as getting my website. So my website right now is google.ca, and I want you to execute Chrome driver on that as well. Okay, so let's activate this and let's take a look at what happens. So I've now opened up Google within my Jupyter notebook that is within my Alteryx workflow. Okay, by opening up a website, any data that was not captured in the HTML, you're now able to scrape. So for instance, we're not going to go heavy. We're not going to go heavy into Selenium or web scraping right now, but what I'll say is if you are interested in actually seeing a webinar or a blog post on this, please let us know and we'll actually develop that because it's something I've had in the back of my mind now for a while. I just haven't had the time to do it. So now if you're interested in say the following functionality, so maybe you want to web scrape for instance, sports betting. So Pinnacle Sports, this is something I've done before. If you want to get some sports betting stuff, and you want these odds, and you want to refresh them every 15 minutes, and you want to export this to a CSV, this is something that we could make a tutorial on too, and we'll actually integrate it into Alteryx too, so that then we can push it out to Tableau, and do any other data preparation stuff that we might need to do with that as well. Another thing we can do as well is if websites are really standardized and they have data in the same structure, what's nice about Alteryx is with your input text tool, you can actually bring in now a list of all the different websites that you would like to scrape or even open. We could create a workflow where you run your Alteryx workflow and you've opened up maybe you've opened up the Wall Street Journal, you've opened up let's say Wall Street Bets on Reddit. Shout out to Steve. We love our Wall Street Bets. We love our stocks. You want to open up anything else, you could even do that as like a personal project as well. Really, the possibilities are endless. So please let us know if you are interested in that. And I will say the last piece that you can also do with Selenium is you can also input text into different elements. So let's say I wanted to run a Google search. Alteryx taking a second here. Let's say I wanted to run a Google search now. And I wanted to actually input data into here. So let's say GME stocks, you're really interested in GME stocks. You want to be able to click on this. Maybe a website is password protected. You want to automatically get in there, insert a password, click enter. That's another thing that we could do as well, and show you why it would be great to import that into Alteryx as well. So I hope you enjoyed this webinar. I'm just going to pass it off back to Steve, and I think we're going to do a few more slides as well as any questions, right, Steve?
Yeah, I think that was an awesome overview. I'm just going to quickly reshare the slides that I had previously. Let's pop that in. Yeah, so I hope everybody found that useful. I saw quite a few questions coming up as we were going through. I did my best to answer them. Some of them were all quite in depth about, how do we select the number of clusters that we're working with, or any of those things. And a couple of people asked to share the code that we were using for some of these basic use cases, probably to sort of build the foundation for your own uses into your use cases. There, I also wanted to mention one quick side note. So on the Alteryx workflows in Alteryx, you probably have seen the Predictive Palette in there that has a bunch of the models and tools that are pre-built in Alteryx. All of those are actually macros. So if, for example, you want to really quickly work with a neural network, and you don't want to do like the whole like import like, I don't know, pandas and like all the, you know, starting from absolute scratch, what you could do is feed your data set to Alteryx, run it through a workflow filter, formulas, whatever, get it the way you want it, and then drag that in and just unpackage that particular macro and go into the R and Python code that it's written in and fine tune some of those parameters yourself, right? So that you're not even coding the model from scratch. You're just like popping it open and you've got it all set up, you know it runs, and then you're just tweaking some parameters to really get down to the nitty gritty of, you know, does this work for what I'm trying to do? On the note of sort of like what's next, what are the next steps that we can sort of get moving on to sort of take more advantage of this? So, I mean, a few people on this call, I assume, already have Alteryx. Some of you might not already have Alteryx, right? So, and you're kind of just starting to get into it, but you know, you've got experience with Python, and now you kind of want to combine your two passions, your one old one and one newfound one. We can set you guys up with some trials to try your hand at some of these pieces. We can also sort of sit down with you and help build out maybe the first workflow that you're working on. You know, you kind of pop open Alteryx, you get your data in there, and then you're, I'm trying to piece together how I would do the use case that I'm working on, but I'm not really sure where to start. Or maybe I'm kind of getting confused with the transpose tool or some of the other pieces. We're more than happy to sit down and kind of work through it with you for a little while, just to make sure that you're standing on your own 2 feet as you're starting to walk with Alteryx and the predictive side of it. And then we've also got our dedicated Alteryx training courses going from core concepts and data types and filters and just sort of parsing and all those pieces, all the way through to the predictive concepts and the best utilization of some of the tools that are available in there, and a little bit of the Python and R tools. Now we might piece those things together as well, all the way through to your organization is now heavily invested in Alteryx, and you're standing up a server, right? And you're trying to figure out, okay, what's the best way to stand that up? So we've got our in-house developed courses for all of those pieces, and delivered by skilled instructors like Jason and some of our other team that a few of you might have met. We also have a couple machine learning boot camps. We've got a 3-day version and a 5-day version that kind of runs through the how do we get up and running with machine learning and starting to build use cases and starting measuring ROI and kind of developing a practice in-house surrounding that. So those are always available. We're happy to sort of get involved in that sense. And that's kind of it. We'll stay on the line for another 5 to 10 minutes, and as if anyone's got questions, pop them into the questions window, and we'll do our best to answer them or direct you to the right spot. Hopefully, everyone's sort of gotten a good sense for it and learned a little bit of something. And if a couple of people walk away from here with their gears turning and thinking about how they can apply some of this stuff, that means we've done our job well.